Hi, and congratulations on completing week 4, Knowing God Lessons from the Wilderness. Now, this week, we were hoping to evaluate the biblical text to identify some significant characteristics of God, to explore the theological themes present in the book of Exodus and continued throughout the Pentateuch, Old Testament and New Testament, and then finally to analyze mankind's character in relation to God's character. Now, to do that, we had a chart where I wanted you to, based upon the reading in Alexander and Exodus, fill out the attached chart in the following way. Identify 6 significant attributes of God. Include an examination of why these are significant attributes, and add the biblical reference to support your findings. Now, if you noticed in this assignment, the key to grading it for me was based upon the readings in Alexander and Exodus, which means that if your assignment only looked at biblical passages, you were not engaging with Alexander. Now, you may have pulled from Alexander, but you're not demonstrating it in the chart, and there was a deduction for that. Because I'm wanting, again, this is a master's level course, and what I'm wanting you folks to really be able to do is whenever you encounter something like a chart, you need to continue to engage in reading, outside research, and the Bible. So those are the 3 types of evidence that I'm looking for. Now, this did not specify an introduction or a conclusion, and yet I would have liked to see students add a conclusion as to what is it that we learned, because the point to this assignment is how do you go to a passage and go beyond the initial understanding, but really tease out what is God telling us about his own character? What is God telling us about Moses? What is God telling us about mankind? So it's how do we take that next level of analysis of a text and really begin to understand secondary questions to the primary question, which is what is God trying to tell us in this passage? And then what is God trying to tell us through this passage about himself and about others? So that's what I was trying to get to. And so if you saw deductions, it could be, I made comments to the effect that I didn't think you delved a bit deep enough into the scripture, but most that I had were that you didn't engage with Alexander and other outside research. Your content was fine, but engaging outside would have rounded out the assignment and given more depth. So C was to discuss how each attribute continued into the New Testament, which folks did a pretty good job on. Then our second was to explore the Song of Moses based upon the reading and your personal experience, and why, in fact, mankind in the 2 chapters, where one, they're praising God, and one, they're almost cursing God. Well, they are, in fact. And why did the author put those together? And I tried to make that point on one of the discussion posts, that it's more than just it happened, because someone had mentioned that there's been many weeks go by and people get hungry and hangry, and that's true. But the author put these with a stark comparison, basically through a period. On the one side of the period, it's, oh, we love God, he's awesome. On the other side of the period, oh, we hate God, he's made us miserable, better for us to have died. And those two, I think, are a stylistic narrative point that the author chose to put together. Now, in the passages or in the discussions, people use forgetful, fear, lack of trust, selfish, impatient, petty, nearsighted, and so forth, which are all keys to our fallen nature. The Israelites saw God, and that was not enough to overcome their nature. And I think that many of us say, well, of course, if we saw God, how much different would our faith be? And the answer is probably not at all, because we can see how they physically saw God. They saw the waters part, and then just a few weeks later, they're like, not so much. So how much more are we in trouble than they are? Keep in mind that the Israelites did not know God's will. In the absence of knowledge, we often turn to our own understanding. If God said, I am going to give you boils and hunger, and your roof is going to collapse on your head, but if you just hold with me, the person who comes to repair the roof doesn't know me, and you're going to lead them to Christ, and your roof is going to get fixed. Well, then instead of crying that our roof fell in, we would be rejoicing and waiting for the person who's going to come fix the roof, because we know we're going to shine God's light upon them, and we're going to get our roof fixed. But because we can't see God's will as we move forward, oftentimes that's when we grumble. So I think that in the midst of hard times, which we've all had, and probably all fallen short of faith, we need to think, what is God trying to do through this? And it may not be about me. It may be about someone else. There was a nice discussion of Psalm 106 and some excellent work discussing human-centric speech. I'm always amazed just how quickly we can go from a strong belief to turning our back on God, showing how shallow our trust often is in God and our fallen nature, which is so strong. Which brings me to a point covered by only a couple of people. What about God's response to our lack of faith? And that's, I tried to make that comment where I said, well, in context of these two chapters, if you go a couple of chapters before and a couple of chapters after, how does God respond to mankind's lack of faith? And God meets them where they are and provides quail. So as we look at it, there is also a sense of, I think, of happiness, rejoicing, something where we know the scripture tells us that even in our lack of faith, even when we don't respond the way we should, God still meets us there. And how great of a God do we serve? That's the case. We don't get what we deserve. We get God who meets us and leads us forward. So all in all, good work this week. I still think we can dive deeper. I would like to see more engagement from the class in discussion posts. But I think the content of the discussions and the papers is coming along. If you have any questions, I am in Antigua all week. I'm flying to the Dominican Republic on Wednesday and Puerto Rico on Friday. So there'll be a couple of hours I'm in the air, but I'll be on the ground most of the week, able to respond to any emails as necessary. And we're at the halfway point. So congratulations for making it this far, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with next week.